Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you had a wonderful Passover. We have a short spring semester. I think it's about 5 weeks. A lot to cover, a lot to talk about. First, I want to thank the sponsors for today's class and today's lunch. Jeff and Lori Goldschin are sponsoring in honor of the new spring semester that starts today. And Nili Smith-Koba sponsoring, there you are, in honor of Israel and the IDF. Indeed, God should watch over all of them, protect all of Israel, especially the members of the IDF that have putting their lives on the line, both on the northern border and in Gaza. 2 announcements to make, and then I'll get right to some of the material I'd like to cover today. I'm going to be giving a lecture this coming Monday night, May 13th at 7:30 p.m. The name of the lecture is The Game of Life Rigged? The Power of Free Will. Do we really have free will, or just a bunch of mice running around in exactly the maze that we're supposed to run in life? So was it all predetermined and we're just living out a play that has been written for us, or do we actually have a say in it? That's what we're going to be talking about Monday night, 7:30. You're all welcome to join me here in this room, but it'll also be available on Zoom. I do prefer that you come and join us inside the Academy for the lecture. So it's Monday, 7:30. If you can, please sign up in advance, jewishacademy.com, and we'll know that you'll be joining us. Or we'll send you a link for it if you're going to watch it on Zoom. And then we just made this arrangement. You have the small flyer in front of you. Those of you listening out there, if you live in the area, next Thursday, May 16th, Commander Yossi Blooming, who is a paratrooper platoon sergeant, he's been fighting in Gaza since the beginning of the war. He was given a short break to go home to his family. His family lives in Potomac, Maryland for Passover. He'll be here for a few days on his way back to Israel, back to the front lines. So if you want to hear directly from someone that's been there from the beginning, what it's like out there, what's going on, how the Israeli soldiers deal with civilian lives, all the questions that you may have on the front lines in Gaza, it's a first-hand report from Commander Yossi Blooming. That's Thursday, a week from tomorrow, 7:30. It's only going to be here live. It will not be on Zoom. So you got to come to here, and you got to make reservations in advance, jewishacademy.com. And yes, there will be security presence, so it will be carefully protected. Okay, the subject today that I wanted to cover, that I hope I will get to, is called Passing the Baton. That's the focus, and let's hope at some point today we pass the baton. If I don't get to it, I'll pass the baton next week. The baton will be passed. But there's a lot on my mind that I'd like to try to get through. Obviously, we've all been seeing the last week these horrific scenes of college campuses throughout the United States of America. If it wasn't so serious, it would be funny. I mean, to see the craziness of what's been going on. I have a number of thoughts, and they're just thoughts that I want to share because I have the microphone, so I'm able to. And then we'll pass the baton around. I want to start from the first thought that's the overriding thought of all. And that is, we can't be intimidated by any of this. And that's something that has to be, we can talk about it, we can talk about anti-Semitism, but the main point that I say to all of you and to everyone listening, whether it's on Facebook or on YouTube or any place this gets sent, we cannot be intimidated by anything. We have to stand strong, we have to stand proud. I remember, like it was a week ago, or 10 days ago, there was, it went all over the news that some rabbi said to the parents, bring your kids home. You know, everyone, we can't protect your kids, take them home. I thought that was the worst response, because that's exactly what they want. Now the opposite should be, we should focus on strengthening, we should focus on dealing with it, but running and hiding is not something that we Jews should be doing today. It has to be a different Jewish world, and we respond very differently today. So that's my overriding thing. I mentioned this on Shabbos in my weekly sermon, and I'll say it again, that I didn't receive from my headquarters, from Chabad headquarters, any talking points, any memo as to how we should be responding. So there was nothing that was made official that I've seen from the Chabad movement. And yet, I've seen that every Chabad house on campuses throughout this country reacted in the exact same manner, which told me, without even thinking through with any type of conference or any type of memo or any strategy, they responded the same naturally because of how they were raised and what it is that they do every single day. Over the last decade, Chabad has expanded tremendously, not just all over the world, but specifically on college campuses throughout this country. So there are Chabad centers just about on every major campus in this country. And this past Friday night, most of them had Friday night Shabbat dinners. And I would say that most of them had more college students there than ever before in history. That's the way you respond. You don't run, you stand taller. The Jewish college students so desperately needed to find an outlet over the last 2 weeks of how to express their Jewish pride and how to respond. And the best response, the response that the opposition has no counter response to, is expressing your Jewish pride. So in all of these images that you may see, you will also find that there is this Chabad table where some Chabad rabbi is there, and he's putting on tefillin with any college student that wants to put on tefillin. And it is the most beautiful scene when you see so many of these protesters with their signs and their masks and their most idiotic statements and these things that never rhyme that's coming through the megaphone. I mean, work on it a little bit, my gosh. They're so like, kindergarten kids could come up with better slogans. To get over this, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Get original, guys. Come on, that's so old. They're so childish. And you see then these college students, and they're putting on tefillin, and they're yelling out, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Am Yisrael Chai. They may be one and they may be 100, but it doesn't matter. That one got their point across so powerfully to the 100. It's not about numbers, really. It's about a sense of pride. And so the greatest response that we can really focus on is standing tall, is standing proud. I love it about all these counter-protests that pro-Israel or pro-Jewish are having on campuses or wherever they may be having. There's no one with a megaphone yelling dumb slogans. What are they doing? They sing songs together and they wave flags. And they don't just wave Israel flags, they wave American flags. There's a patriotism to them. There's a love for country, a love for the Jewish people, a love for Israel, and a love to be together. It's such an extreme opposite of what you're seeing going on everywhere else. And that, to me, is the greatest statement we can make. We are not intimidated. We're not running away. We're not hiding. We're not taking our kids home. If we want to take our kids home, we'll talk about that. Maybe the goal shouldn't be higher education. Maybe there should be other goals in the Jewish community, and we'll get to that. But if your kid is in university, don't say run away. You can say be careful, but don't hide. Don't say take the kippah off. Don't say take the mezuzah off. That's what the enemies want. The opposite. Find your fellow Jews together and respond, not with force, but with pride. And so that is the overall theme. I want to go back to a statement I heard from Dennis Prager many years ago. Dennis Prager is a graduate of Columbia University, which has been much in the news of late. And he took on the studies of communism and socialism. That's what he majored in. It's an understanding of its roots, it's what brought it about, its spreading. That's what he focused on. And he always said that he couldn't understand, after truly understanding the consequences of communism and socialism, which was the death of some 50 million people, why professors in universities are so obsessed and embrace the communist philosophy. And he just never understood it. When something is so evil, how could professors talk about it in such glowing terms? He baffled was by this. Until he remembered a verse that he said he learned in first grade in the yeshiva. And I remember this slogan hanging in first grade. It was a poster board that we had hanging. It comes from the book of Tehillim. It was a statement that King David said. It was, Reishis Chachma Yiras Elokim. If anyone's gone to a Jewish day school, you may remember that. I believe it's in Psalm, possibly 111. I'm not exactly sure. 111?
Yes.
Thank you. Reishis Chachma Yiras Elokim means the pathway to wisdom, the beginning of wisdom, is the fear and awe of God. And if you don't have this faith in God and a belief in God and don't live with God, then all your wisdom is for naught. It won't get you anywhere. And that to him was the answer. Is it if you're not embracing a life where there is a higher being, where there is a creator, where there is a purpose, where there is a mission, your wisdom could lead you into the most darkest of places. Nazis were college educated too. They weren't dumb murderers, they were bright murderers, but they had no Yiras Elokim. There was no fear of God, there was no awe of God. It wasn't living with a set of morals. And so we've seen this played out. I don't think the real news story is how many college students are doing what they're doing. It's how many professors are supporting it. That to me is the bigger question. That college students do crazy things. Hey, I went to rabbinical school in the city of Boston for 2 years. I didn't go to the Boston University or any other university. I went to a rabbinical school, but it was right next to it. I know how crazy college campuses can get. And the parties are wild. And any mishigas that comes along, they jump on board. I get that. It was one of the years I was there. I was there the year 1980 and 81. I believe that's when I was in Boston. So that meant, 80 and 81. We were out giving out Hanukkah menorahs in Boston, what's the main park? Is it the Commons? Boston Commons. We were giving out Hanukkah menorahs. It was Hanukkah, and we were giving, excuse me, are you Jewish? Here, do you have a Hanukkah menorah? Do you have candles? That's what we were busy doing. And suddenly there was a run on our candles. Everyone wanted Hanukkah candles. We couldn't figure out what just happened. Usually it was 1 in 10, excuse me, you're Jewish. Someone would say, yeah, but don't bother me. Some would say, ignore us. Some would say, yes, do we need a menorah? Yes. But, 1 out of 10 maybe you would end up in a conversation, but the majority would just, all of a sudden everyone came, yes, I need one of those, I need one of those. It was great. We sold out so fast until we found out. John Lennon died that day, and they were doing a candlelight vigil in the park, and every student came out, and every student needed a candle, and they found out some Hasidic guys were giving out candles. So on college campuses a lot go, but we're seeing professors. We're seeing those that stand in the front of a classroom. They're educating the next generation. And they're part of this, and they're supporting their students, and they're encouraging their students. That's the part that really boggles the mind. So I'm more concerned, honestly, I'm more concerned as an American about the future of this country than I am as a Jew about anti-Semitism. To me, the greatest question I have is, where is this country going? If these are your professors that are educating the next generation of Americans. Judaism, like we said in the Passover Seder, Shebachol Dor Dor, we're used to this. We have seen this in every generation. We've seen anti-Semitism. We know it's not going away. We're prepared for it. We deal with it. We know how. But America, do you know what's coming? That to me is the greater question. When your professors, not of dinky little universities, but your professors at Harvard and at Yale and Columbia and New York University and Berkeley and Stanford, I can go on and on. When they're standing there saying this same stuff, When they're saying that they have a right to free expression. Really? And if they were saying racist remarks against blacks, would they have that same right for free expression? We know that. If they were standing there with nooses and dressed like the KKK, would that be acceptable? But if they're saying it about Jews in Israel, then it's okay. And you and your professor warped mind are going to try to find intellectual words to back this up? America, wake up. America, you have a challenge on your hands about tomorrow. We Jews, we're going to be okay. We've gotten through a lot worse than what's going on at Harvard and Yale. And we made it through, and we're strong, and we get stronger and stronger. Shebechol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chaloseinu. In every generation, there has been our Hitlers and Stalins and Yamach Shemams, one after the next. And we're still here. And we will be here past Hamas and past Hezbollah. We will survive. But we should be concerned about the future of this country. Yeah. Where is this country going when professors can do what they're doing these days? Now, the claims that are being made are so false and so outrageous that I don't want to devote too much time to it because A, we've spoken about it before, and B, because you're actually giving attention to some of the idiotic things that are coming out of their mouths. But I just say this point. Are they really concerned about civilians being killed? Is that what this is about? That they're suddenly concerned about civilians being killed? That there's something noble about it because they're concerned about the innocent civilians being killed? Then where were they when civilians were killed in Afghanistan? It came after 9/11, we wanted someone to pay the price. And we fingered Osama bin Laden. Afghanistan didn't attack the World Trade Center. Afghanistan didn't cause 9/11, but Afghanistan allowed Osama bin Laden in their country and gave him safe haven. And our president got on TV, and I believe rightfully so, and said, if you're harboring a terrorist, then we're going to count you as a terrorist. And unless you give him up, we're coming after you. And we did. And guess what? Civilians died. In any war, civilians died. But it was a cause that America believed in. Right now, on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, many civilians are being killed every single day. Most college students don't even know that that war is going on, let alone protesting about civilians being killed. In Syria, there's been a civil war going on for over a decade. How many civilians are being killed on a regular daily basis? Where's the protests for the civilians of Syria that have been killed over the last decade? I haven't seen any. No protests, no sit-ins. Saddam Hussein was in power for how many years? How many of his own people did he butcher? How many did he hang for doing nothing? His own people. Arab versus Arab. Muslim versus Muslim. Did anyone care? Were there any demonstrations on any campus life that we have to stop Saddam Hussein from his atrocities? What about Gaddafi? I don't remember protests against Gaddafi. Idi Amin, anyone remember him from Uganda? How many people did he butcher in his life? You can go down nation after nation. No protests about North Korea. I mean, we can keep going. Suddenly, when Israel's involved in a battle for survival, now we care about civilians. We care about civilians that we have no idea where this count is coming from, because the count is coming from Hamas is releasing the count. And we really trust Hamas to release a count. And they say, no, it's coming from our health officials. But their health officials are the ones that were holding hostages in hospitals. And they're the ones giving us counts, and they're telling us how many children. And yet, we still can't get a count of how many hostages there are alive. That number, no one seems to know. And the Red Cross can't give us a number, and the Red Cross can't insist on visiting our hostages. That we don't know. But 35,000 civilians were killed. That we know, because Hamas told us. And they're all innocent, right? Even though so many of them are involved themselves in the battle against Israel. So many ran into Israel on October 7th and kidnapped Jews themselves and brought them back into Gaza. Hamas isn't holding all remaining 130-some hostages. Many people in Gaza are holding them as prizes because they know they'll be able to sell them at some point for a high price. I don't see too many demonstrations on college campuses about Vladimir Putin and how many Ukrainians he's killed. That's allowed. That dictatorship is okay. Yeah, and when you see any of the interviews that take place with any of these guys doing the demonstrations, I mean, again, the intellectual level is rather low. There's not much there. So what can be done about it? Well, I have a few suggestions. Just some suggestions. The amount of funds that Jewish charity donates to the universities in this country could support every single Jewish child going to a Jewish day school, could support every single synagogue on the face of the earth. The amount of charity that goes to American universities that are given by Jewish donors is enough to support every Jewish charity on the face of the earth. We're supporting this. All you need is to turn off the switch and you say to university presidents, if this goes on, no more checks. Good. You'll see how quickly this will stop. It will stop as quickly as if these demonstrations were against the black community. That's how quick this would stop. It would stop in one day. In one day, the president of every university would be calling in their local police department, and if their local police department couldn't put it down, they would be calling their governor to ask that they send in the troops, that they send in the National Guard. And if the National Guard couldn't call it, they would call Washington. It would be put out in 24 hours. It's in our hands. I'm not saying any of you here in this room or listening are the ones writing the big $10 million, $20 million, $50 million, $100 million checks. But those that are writing those big checks, it's in your hands. You can stop it. You give that much money, the president of any university will take your call. So that's, on a very simple level, that's something we can do. The second thing we all can do is we can get involved politically. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you have work to do. There's federal funding that goes to universities in this country. They get money from the government. The government simply has to say, the President of the United States would speak from the Oval Office today, and he would simply say, this will stop and it will stop now. And if not, we're going to bring civil rights violations against the universities. What's the civil rights violation? A Jewish student is trying to get into class and he's not being allowed in. He's being blocked, and no security from the university is saying, come with me, Abraham, I'll help you get to your class. Their parents are paying hefty tuition bills and they're not being allowed to get in. That's violating their civil rights, and because violating it because they're Jewish, that's violating their civil rights. They're violating federal law. And if the Attorney General's office would get involved and simply tell every university, not another penny will come to university from this government if these civil rights violations continue, this would be over right away. This could all end. I don't think the media wants it to end. I think they're enjoying it. I think that the pro-Hamas people are enjoying this. I mean, there's the people that are benefiting from this. But there's tools that are so available for this to be brought to an end. I also call upon, and I saw this clip from Ole Miss, and I think it should spread, where there are universities where the Gentile community is standing up. And they're surrounding their fellow Jewish students and saying, we're going to help you out. You're not alone in this. You want to get to your class? We're taking you in. And they're coming out in big numbers. So it would be nice to see the Christian community, the Islamic community, the Hindu community of students to embrace their Jewish students and to say, we will be there for you. You're not alone. It would be nice to see that there's counter-protests, not just of people that are necessarily pro-Israel or pro-Jews, but simply pro-decency. And if your fellow classmates are feeling harassed, stand up for your fellow classmates just because they're your fellow classmates. So I think you're starting to see it on some of the universities, and I hope it would spread drastically to every university. Because I believe there is a silent majority of students in the universities of our country that are decent students, that really want to go to study, that want a profession. But they're silent because they're intimidated by this loud minority. So I call upon the silent majority to be silent no more. Speak up. whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're a Hindu, whether you're an atheist. Stand up for your fellow students. It's the right thing to do. The next thing on my list would be to disclose the funding. This doesn't happen without funding. Who's funding this and why? And challenge those that are funding it. Put it out there so that we all know these are the institutions that are funding this. Let it be public knowledge. Don't hide. Put it out there. This is what you're funding. We know George Soros is proud that he's behind some of this. It's an embarrassment to us as the Jewish people that he's one of us that's funding all of this, or part of it. But at least he puts it out there. But there's many others that are funding it. Put their names out there so that society at large could know this is what you're behind. And finally, another thought that I have on my mind. I question our, let me back this up. When you get the pregnancy test back that shows that you're expecting a child, that you have conceived a child, the first thing you do is you open up the college fund. You start preparing right there for your little tatala that's going to be born to be able to go to a great university. And you start calculating how much money you have to put away so that you'll be able to pay tuition for your kid to go for higher education. It has been the goal of the Jewish people ever since we came to the shores of this country, that our kids are going to go to the greatest universities, that they're going to get their PhDs and their master's degrees and their bachelor's degrees, and they're going to be educated, right? They came off the ship and they said, my kids here in this country, they're going to be educated. And we've put so much of sacrifice into this idea of higher education. Well, maybe it's the golden calf of our generation. Maybe it's something we worship that didn't deserve that much worshiping. Maybe the focus really should be more on Jewish pride and Jewish education. It should be more about your heritage and knowing who you are than if my kid can make it into Harvard. Because it has been disclosed before all of our eyes that the ones giving the instructions at Harvard are not necessarily the ones we want our kids studying from. So perhaps there has to be a little bit of a change in the thinking. When a Jewish child is born, yeah, maybe you want to open some funds for them for the future. But it shouldn't only be about higher education. It should be about life. What school are they going to go to? What elementary school are they going to go to? What community are you going to raise your child in? What high school are they going to go to? What type of Jewish education are they going to get? What synagogue will you go to? These questions perhaps are far more valuable than what university they're going to go to. And this takes a change in our thinking, and perhaps some of what we've experienced now will help us bring about some of these changes. Those are some of my thoughts. And again, I go back to the best response is with Jewish pride. I mentioned before about the people that give tens of millions of dollars to universities, and this is the prize that they're getting for it. I should mention the flip side of it. There's someone named George Rohr, R-O-H-R, son of Sam Rohr of blessed memory. Sam Rohr was a tremendous philanthropist, gave a lot of charity dollars, and his son followed in his footsteps. And George Rohr, this goes back a few decades, decided that he's going to put his charity into opening up Chabad centers on college campuses all over this country. And he has put in literally over $100 million into this operation. And it's because of that I'm able to say that last Friday night there were these Friday night dinners everywhere. That's the way we respond. You want to take your Jewish charity dollars and invest it in Jewish students, in Jewish education, in Jewish programs. That's smart charity at work for us. And that should become our focus. Most important, don't be intimidated by it. Stand strong. Am Yisrael Chai. We're going to get through this. There's going to be glorious days ahead for Klal Yisrael, for Israel, for the IDF. Let's just think positive and stay strong. Let's get to passing the baton a little bit for the few minutes that we have remaining together. We'll continue it next week. A few days ago was Yom HaZikaron. That was the day that we remember the Holocaust. That very word, Zikaron, you had a few days ago, was also the end of Passover. where we had Yiskar, same word, Zachor, to remember. Throughout the entire Torah, we find this word, Zachor, to remember, mentioned in association with many of the commandments. What else do you have Zachor? You maybe heard this. Zachor es Yom HaShabbos. Remember the Sabbath day. Remember that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So remember the Shabbos. Over and over in the whole story of Exodus, we're told, remember this day. How do we remember this day? Well, we had a Passover Seder. Because we remember this day. Remember the plagues that God did in Egypt. Remember the splitting of the sea. Remember the revelation at Sinai. Remember the manna at heaven. Remember God's protection in the wilderness. And we have things that we do as Jewish tradition to remember all of this. We have the sukkah to remember God's protection in the wilderness. We have challah on our table Friday night, remembering the manna. Every time the Torah told us to remember, we do something, practically speaking, in order to remember. Remember what Amalek tried to do with you, this vicious nation that tried to wipe us out. Remember that. Remember. To remember is paramount in Judaism. To remember means that you connect your present to your past. You didn't just start existence here today. You are a continuation. To remember means you see time not just as a moment of the here and now, but you see time as a link. It's a link that connects you. It's this direct line to our past, and it's a link to our future. That's what time is. When we say to remember, it means that you see that we're not just living our own lives. That we live on the shoulders of history. That what happened in my parents' life, my grandparents' life, going all the way back, actually matters to me. Not just in its DNA form, but in the experiences they had that they passed along from one generation to another generation. We live for yesterday and we live for tomorrow. And we're that link between yesterday and tomorrow. A critical link. Because if that critical link, who we are, doesn't link yesterday and tomorrow, Judaism comes to an end. It all stops. We can't miss out a single generation. There can't be a gap. So, every 4 years, and this summer is happening again, I believe it's in Paris, there's this sporting event called the Olympics. And one of the events at the Olympics, there's running races that take place. There's a 100-meter dash and a 200-meter dash. Is that guy still the fastest guy in the world still around? What's his name? Bolt. He's still doing it? No. Bolt.
Yeah, I think it's Bolt.
A runner?
He's a runner, but yeah, you can't, he's like...
Oh, he retired.
He retired, he's done. All right, so someone's got a chance. But a part of the running races, there's the relay race. The relay race is a little bit different than the other races because the relay race is part of a team. So you're not running for your own gold medal, but you're part of a team. And each runner, they don't tag the next runner, they hand over a baton. So in order to have the smooth transfer from one runner to the next, each one is holding a baton in hand. And as they get close to the guy next on your team, they hand the baton. They got to hand that baton carefully, because if that baton drops on the floor, that split second it takes to get it, that's the difference of gold to 10th place. It's that close. Any of you saw races this past weekend, I believe Kentucky Derby and some car race? Anybody in this room? Wow. Kentucky Derby I didn't see because it was on Shabbos, but I heard about it. It was a horse race that the difference between it was a photo finish, and then there was this car race that was 1,000th of a second. Do you know what 1,000th of a second is? 1,000th of I don't even think it exists. And they first called it for one winner, and then they had to switch it because the computer figured out that there was 1,000th of a second. That means a hair passed the line first. So you drop the baton, it's kaput. So there has to be this clean handoff from one baton holder to the next baton holder. Anyone ever visit an Olympic training village? I did in Colorado. You've gone?
Barcelona.
Okay. So these guys that are in the Olympics, they didn't wake up 2 months before and say, hey, I have some skill, let me try out. They've been planning this since they were in the cradle. I mean, it starts years in advance. And they literally go living in a dorm on one of these Olympic training facilities. And they're going to work there for years leading up to their Olympics that they're designated to try to compete in. Their trainers will tell them how many years it will take to get their body in the best of shape. Any of the great swimmers and the great runners, they've put years and years before you ever heard their name into training. And their training is so dictated to them. Literally, what time they wake up in the morning, what they eat for breakfast is measured, what they eat for lunch is measured, every calorie is measured, every single thing is controlled. They have no control over their lives. You think yeshiva is hard. I mean, this place, man, it's putting in the hours of every type of training. So every one of these runners that are on that floor have dedicated years of their lives to this training, to this sport. And if they're on the floor, yeah, they may come in 10th place, but my gosh, they're from the best in the world. At least they're the best representing their country. So the country will send a few contestants representing their entire country. So they're there, they've put in time. And if you have a relay race, that means there's 4 members on your team that have invested years and years of their lives, which means thousands of hours to be at this particular spot, at this particular place. They are your partners. They are your teammates. It's your race and it's their race. So when each individual runner finishes their lap and the other guys are waiting for their turn, they're cheering on their teammates. Now, yesterday they could have been opponents, right? Because they were each running the 100-meter dash against each other. But now they're teammates. Now they're bonded. And they're screaming, cheering for their team, their leader, the first guy running around, to take a little bit of a lead. Because if they take a 100th of a second lead and pass the baton cleanly, now you're in the lead because your teammate gave you that lead. And that keeps going as this race continues. So it's your race. If they do well, you win. You can get the gold because your teammates are also doing well. So imagine it's you. Let's imagine you've trained for 8 years. You've put everything into it. You're going to Paris. You make it through the finals, you make it through the locals, you make it through the California races and then the national races, and you win the US championship, and now you're on the way because you have been selected to be the United States Olympic team going to Paris for the Olympics, and you're on that relay race team. Imagine the pressure leading up to the day of the race. Imagine how you feel. Imagine the whole world is on you. You know billions of people are going to be watching. They're all watching you. And you're there. And your first member of your team, you're given the role of the anchor. You know what the anchor is? He's the last guy. So that's the most pressured position. Some will say the first is, some will say the anchor is. But he watches as his first runner runs around, and he opens up that 100th of a second lead. Smooth transition of the baton to runner number 2. He expands the lead. Your team now has a 50th of a second lead. And runner number 2 runs, and he expands the lead, passes it to transition to runner number 3. He opens the lead even more. You have a half of a second lead. And the guy is coming at you now. You could see him, and he's got the baton in his hand. And there is those few seconds before he comes to you to hand the baton. And at that moment you say, the pressure's too much, forget it, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah. Right.
What stops you from doing that? Because the pressure is way too much. The pressure is beyond what the human being can possibly handle at that moment. It's all on your hands. And these guys have given you the baton with the lead, but they're also giving you the pressure. So why don't you quit? The instincts would say, I got to get out of here. This is too much for me. pride of country and pride of team, which means I can't let them down. I can't let them down. They're part of the team. And country. My parents are in, they flew in. They're here. My uncle that I never spoke to in my life is here, right? They're all watching. There's a whole American cheering section. They got flags flying, they're screaming, and they're all watching at home. They're all waiting for me. So the pressure's great, but I can't quit. Even though I want to, even though this is too much for me, even though I'm too scared. All you have to do is take that baton and run your 400 meters. All eyes are upon you. Your teammates, your family, your coaches, your country, the world. It's all on you. And you can't quit because you know the efforts that you made were also made by all these others. The 3 guys that came before me, they also put in their time. They also did their years. They also gave up eating Pringles and drinking Mountain Dew. They gave it all up for this. And you can't walk away from them. And so you take that baton and you run with everything that you have. My dear fellow Jews, we are part of an unfinished race. It's a race we didn't start, but it's a race we cannot quit. It's a race we dare not quit. Our lives are not ours alone. We are part of a team. Our parents are on that team. Our grandparents are on that team. Our ancestors who lived through a Holocaust are on that team. Our ancestors who lived through pogroms and gulags, they're on our team. Our family members who survived an inquisition and expulsions, they're on our team. If we go back in time, if we go back in our story, and we go back all the way to the days of the Holy Temple, we go back to the days of the Roman destruction of the Holy Temple, and we go back to the days of Masada, and we go back to the days of the Maccabees, and we go back to the days of Mordecai and Esther, and we go back to the days of David and Goliath, and we go back to the days of Joshua and Jericho, and we go back to the days that our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. They were all part of our team. Zachor, that's the power to remember. Remember your teammates. Remember their heroics. Remember their sacrifice. Remember their way of life. Remember their commitment to God. Now take the baton and run your lap. That's the challenge that's put before us. That's why we need to take that baton and we need to run it and we need to pass it to our children and to our grandchildren because the race isn't over. It's over for today, but we will continue on our passing of the baton next Wednesday. I invite you all to join, 12:30. We'll see you then. There's lunch for everybody. Hope to see you both Monday night of next week and Thursday night of next week.